Storytelling is one of the fundamentals of human culture. It's been the most important way for the most part of human history to spread information, educate the young, and preserve the collective memory. Nowadays, kids tend to rather listen to random people's story on YouTube and TikTok, like myself. But just a generation or two ago, it wasn't uncommon that children eagerly wait for a bedtime story from parents and grandparents. It was first and foremost for an entertainment, but it also helped to build an intergenerational bond and understanding, as well as to pass down a life's wisdom. And in that regard, those bedtime stories were not always mellow, sweet, heartwarming, in other words, child-appropriate by modern sensibility. Often they were very raw, cruel, and even nightmare-inducing, because, well, that is sadly the reality in the world, and the stories as a form of education had to reflect that. Today, I collected scary bedtime stories told by grandpas and grandmas. Spooky content aside, I think they provide a little peep into the lifestyle, historic events, and taboos and beliefs of the past generation. So, here are 6 allegedly scary bedtime stories from grandparents. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by host, Anthony. It's a story my granny told me when I was a teenager. It's from when Granny was a young mother. I gather it was when my mother was still a baby. Her home was in a remote countryside village. It was connected to the nearest town by a sparsely running bus whose route included a rough road over a mountain. One day, Granny went to the town on the market day. She left home in the morning, but by the time she was on the bus way back with a heavy bundle of shopping, it was already dusk. She was anxious to go back home quickly to tend her baby and cook dinner for the family. But then, the bus that was struggling over the winding road of the mountain abruptly stopped. Granny looked over to see what happened, and saw in the middle of the road, standing a woman, blocking the way. The driver seemed stirred, but he soon calmly said to other passengers that everything was going to be okay. They should just keep calm and stay put. He then turned off all the lights inside the bus and kept the door opened. Granny felt anxious but kept silent, just tightly holding onto her bundle. Then she felt a chill as if something cold walked past her. The driver made sure the mystery woman was not on the road anymore before he started the bus again. It was a chilling ride in silence and darkness, but the bus made a safe journey to its destination. Apparently, some ghosts would wait to get a ride, and if you refuse them for fear, the car is likely to run into a crash or an accident. The bus driver knew it well enough and acted calmly and correctly. Provided you believe in such things, there's strong spiritual ability running in my family, both on my father's and mother's sides. And the following story is what my grandma told me when I was little. It goes back to when she herself was a young girl, when Korea was still under the Japanese imperial rule. One night, she was already in bed, but woken up by somebody calling for her from the outside.
Come out, come, let us play together.
Even in still drowsy state, Grandma knew it should be something unholy, and yelled back, "It's too late already. Maybe next time." but the voice responded with irritation.
No! It has to be tonight. Come out now!
And with that, Grandma found herself she couldn't move at her will anymore. As if she turned into a marionette, her body stood up and went outside against her will. Under the full moon, Grandma could see what was waiting in front of the gate. It was a beast resembling a fox, but was as tall as a grown-up man. Its pure white fur was luscious, but the eyes were so terrifying that Grandma could instantly tell what a dangerous creature it was. But what was the use of that insight when she could not control her own body? She helplessly followed after the fox creature as it led her way. The fox walked only with hind legs like a person, and its forelegs also looked more like that of a person with fingers, except they were covered with fur and had long, sharp nails. The fox led her through the farming field, past the entry of the village, and now into the mountain. Grandma knew she had no chance once in the mountain, but she couldn't do anything but let tears down her face. But then,
"How dare you!"
a huge guy suddenly appeared from behind a holly tree at the entry to the village and flew over. Here Grandma emphasized that he literally flew over and gave one hard blow to the fox with a big club. The fox only let out a short scream and quickly ran away into the mountain. That was the last thing Grandma remembers before she passed out. Following morning, upon finding her gone missing, her father alerted his neighbors and searched around and found Grandma sleeping under the village totem at the entry to the village. In the following years, there were rumors about an old man in the neighboring village on his drunken way back home got attacked by what looked like a huge fox, or a child gone missing only to be found with his heart gouged out. But nobody in Grandma's village suffered any such. Grandma still believes it was the village totem that saved her and her neighbors. It's a story my friend told me. His grandma is from a small village surrounded by tall mountains all around. The only way out to the outer world was through a gorge over a steep hill. Adults in the village would warn not to take the way by oneself, especially after sunset. One summer day, the grandma, as a little girl, spent the day with friends in the stream outside the village. As the sun headed to the west, her friends started going back home. But Grandma wanted to enjoy the cool water a bit longer. After all the adults in her family were away that day to a different town for a family business, so there would be nobody to reprimand her for coming back late. So she played on in the water by herself till the dusk. Only when it got dark, she remembered what adults always told her, not to take the way over the hill after dark. But what else could she do when that was the only way home? As she carefully trod her way over the hill in the fast-setting dark, she saw a man walking ahead of her. She welcomed the prospect of a company over the hill, so hastened her steps to catch up with him. But strangely, the distance didn't close in. She called out for him too, but he showed no response. Soon, she realized more odd things. When a person climbs up a slope, his body would naturally lean forward to balance. But he was straight up like a stick. No, actually, as the slope got steeper, his body seemed bending backwards, more and more, until his head bent so back that his eyes met Grandma's. And upon seeing Grandma, the man started running backwards towards Grandma. She panicked and ran back down. When she looked back, there wasn't the man anymore. She dropped on the spot. She didn't know what to do. Until she thought of an uncle who lived in the cottage near the top of the hill. She decided to stay at the night at his and moved her shaky steps up the hill once again. When she managed to reach near Uncle's cottage, she called for him. Her uncle came out and said,
What are you doing there by yourself? Come on in, quickly.
But before Grandma ran to him, somebody called out from her behind.
That's not your uncle. Come to me.
She was confused and terrified. But didn't Uncle just come out from his cottage? He must be the uncle. When she reached his yard, Uncle said,
Why are you all by yourself? Your parents should be worried. Come on in.
And walked into the cottage. Grandma suddenly realized there was no light on anywhere in the cottage despite the dark. And by the way, wasn't every adult in the family out to the family business today? She could not think straight anymore and just turned around and ran. Something then whispered in her ears.
Smarter than I thought.
Which was too much, and she fainted on the spot. When she woke up next morning, she found herself still just at the foot of the hill. It's a story my grandpa told me. I'll state it from the first person's point of view for the ease of writing. In the mountain near my village is a cemetery. I don't know when the plot was turned into the cemetery, but it has been as long as I can remember. When someone died in the village, the coffin was carried and marched to the cemetery. A sad occasion for the family and friends of the deceased, but for the little kids of the village, including myself, it was an occasion to feast. The whole country was poor then, and we kids were always hungry. The only time we could eat anything special were either on a major holiday such as the New Year's or when there was a funeral. So when kids felt particularly hungry, some even said, "Whenever do we go to the cemetery next?" Thoughtless and childish, I know. One day an old man passed, and after 3 days of funeral, guys carried a coffin to the cemetery while women followed carrying food on their heads to feed the diggers and guests. As usual, the gang of kids followed them. We gorged down the food, grilled beef, steamed pork, rice cakes, and colorful candies. But still hungry us hovered around other adults having their meal, and some of them handed over a piece of meat or candy to us. Yet we still hung around till the end of the burial to take the leftovers. When we were coming down with a bundle of leftover, we saw an old man walking towards the cemetery. As we walked past, he asked,
Did you have lots of delicious things?
Yes, we did,
we replied. The old man smiled kindly and carried on with his way. But then, suddenly one of the kids froze and said,
"But today was his burial."
We then all looked back to find the old man no more. We all screamed and ran down the village. Upon hearing our story, village adults said,
Maybe he wanted to look around the village before going away.
and then they told us we should have a bath and stay awake the whole night since we had encountered a ghost. I was scared enough to follow the instruction as much as to bathe, but I was little and dozed off in no time. Then I had a dream. We were following the funeral march just as we did earlier, but nobody was carrying the coffin. It was just floating on its own. But maybe because it was a dream, none of the kids seemed to think it odd. And when the coffin reached the cemetery, we were about to follow it in. Suddenly the dead old man that we encountered earlier appeared and blocked us, and with a scary face shouted,
You've had enough. Now go away. Shoo!
and started beating us with his walking stick. It hurted so much that I woke up. Apparently, all the kids who were at the burial had more or less similar dreams, and all of us fell ill, only to get all right in 3 days. Our parents and adults, upon hearing about our dream, all agreed the dead old man had saved us and took us to the tomb of his to thank him. Since the incident, village kids were banned from following the funeral march. Yet, some kids would still say, "Whenever do we go to the cemetery next?" My grandma was born in 1919 and passed away in 2012 when I was a freshman. It's a story she told me. When I was little, she used to tell me not to cover my face with a blanket when I slept, like it was a big taboo. She would say that might give a wrong signal to a grim reaper that the sleeper is already dead. I would just laugh it off if I heard it now, but as a little boy, it was scary enough for me to stick to what she told me to. It was only when I became a teenager that I asked Grandma where the real reason of the taboo lied. During the World War II, Korea was still the colony of Japan. All the young men in the village was drafted into the military or for a hard labor, including Grandpa. In the village full of women was a woman who used to be a shaman, though by then her divine power had waned and she stopped the work. Her fiancé, too, was taken away into the war. Fortunately, my grandpa was sent to work in a factory, but the ex-shaman's fiancé wasn't so lucky and he was sent to the front line. When the war was over, the men came back one by one to their village, but the shaman's fiancé didn't. She went mad with a broken heart. Not long after, she was found hung to the big old holy tree at the entry to the village. Underneath was her will, or more like a curse.
I can't pass on like this. I will come back to take those who sent my love to death,
it read. In the following 3 months, 3 people died. They were all found suffocated to death with their nose and mouth stuffed with a blanket they were sleeping under. And they were all who enjoyed wealth and power over other villagers as the minions to Japanese authority. There was a family gathering at my grandpa's, Mom's father. It got late after a big dinner, and my family decided to stay there. While adults moved on to drink and talk about economy and politics, I and my cousins settled down to watch a horror film together. In the middle of the film, Grandpa came over to us and handed some pocket money, as he usually does when he gets nicely tipsy. He gave a glance at the film we were watching and said,
Do you find that scary?
and proceeded,
Well, I'll tell you what was the scariest in my 70-year life.
The film was actually not very amusing, so we all switched to Grandpa's story. My grandpa's from what is now the northern province in North Korea, a little village of 30 or so households. Grandpa then just hit puberty, and as any teenager at that age would, he too was going through that rebellious and temperamental period. But one of his mates seemed to have it particularly wild. Once he lost temper, he would go mad, bite others like a mad dog, break and throw things. Let's call the mad dog of the boy Kwang-soo for the sake of the story. Kwang-soo caused the storm and destruction on his path daily in that small village, and his parents had to bow down and apologize to other villagers every time their son created yet another trouble. Regardless, Kwang-soo's rampage got worse and worse, and it was obvious his parents had no control. The last straw snapped one particularly dry month of autumn. Kwang-soo wanted to grill a squirrel he caught and started a fire, and it caught up by bone-dry fallen leaves and bushes, and eventually 4 of the neighboring houses. Fortunately, nobody died, but some got severe burn on his arm, and a lady had her entire hair sizzled away. It was a huge damage in such a small village that it wouldn't have been a surprise even if the mad boy's family were lynched by the villagers and vanished. His parents avoided the worst by giving away their cows and house. By some irony, the fire didn't touch Kwang-soo's own house, to the fire victims. Now, homeless and penniless, the family had to take a temporary shelter at a village barn. A few days later, when things were barely calmed down, the mother of Kwang-soo came to see Grandpa's mother. She straight emptied several bowls of rice wine and lamented and cried,
I can't live like this with that bastard of a son. I'll have to kill him.
Her husband came to fetch the wife, but the drunken woman refused, saying,
No, I'm not going back. I'd rather live here. I'd rather be mouse or a dog of this family than go back home with that monster.
Her drunken laments carried on into the evening, and the neighbors all bad-mouthed her with hushed voices. But then one of them would still say,
But it's understandable when her own son is worse than a possessed devil.
And others would nod in agreement. The pitiful sight seemed to snap something in her husband. He marched back alone to the barn, got hold of his son, and beat and stomped on Kwang-soo till he nearly passed out. Then he tied up the boy and carried him into the local mountain, only to be back to the village by himself. The following day, my grandpa was feeding chickens at the foot of the mountain. They kept the chicken coop there. And shocked by Kwang-soo jumping out from the herd of goats, screaming like a madman. Kwang-soo looked a mess, with dirt and sweat, his clothes all torn, his nails ripped off, and scratched and blood scabs all over. Grandpa at first thought it was a devil jumping out to get him. Since that day, Kwang-soo behaved like the half the man he used to be. He went around all crouched and shrunken down, with his eyes never looking up, and he spoke hardly anything either. 2 seasons passed, and summer came. Grandpa ran into Kwang-soo skimming stones by the river by himself. Grandpa asked him what had happened in the mountain. At first, Kwangs didn't say anything, but in the end, he said with cracked voice,
There's a ghost in the mountain. Never go there.
That fateful day last autumn, his dad took him to the mountain and tied him to a tree.
You live here till you correct yourself. A beast shall live like a beast,
he said, and left. There was no electricity, let alone a street lamp. The night in the mountain was pitch dark. Kwangsu screamed and fought against the rope like a madman till he exhausted himself out. At first, he thought he heard tree branches rubbing against each other. Then gradually he realized it was talking to him.
I've come for you. Your parents dumped you here. They won't come back. You are here all alone and will starve to death.
It whispered in that gnawing voice. Kwangs got scared and struggled to loosen the rope. The voice got suddenly loud and slapped Kwangsu's eardrum.
I said I've come for you, son of a bitch. Where's my meat?
Kwangsu then heard what sounded like a tree branch snap, and something dry and rough started scratching his face all over. He couldn't see if it was a dry autumn branch waving about in the wind or if somebody was intentionally rubbing it on him, but it carried on till his face was covered with bleeding scratches, regardless of him screaming to stop.
Now I smell the meat,
the voice said.
Are the villagers celebrating you are vanished? Or rather, do I smell it from you?
Kwangsu realized whatever it was intending to eat him alive. Desperate Kwangsu twisted his body and managed to slide himself down till the rope reached his mouth. He went at it with his teeth to free himself. Strangely, it tasted salty. Something warm and salty seemed to be oozing out from the rope. Regardless, Kwangsu bit it off till his teeth almost broke and managed to break it. But his panic-stricken body couldn't dart off as he wanted. The arms and legs didn't coordinate, and he desperately floundered his arms and legs forward till his hand touched something hard. It was a tree root. He wasn't running away, but digging the ground.
Dig deeper. There shall be where you rest. Dig wider so that I can lie with you,
the voice said, followed by bustling noise coming closer. Something fell on Kwangsu's shoulder. Rope? But the rope rolled into and stuffed his mouth, that warm, salty taste filling up his mouth again. He gagged and threw up to spit the rope out, and it was then he heard a rooster crow. That meant the chicken coop was not far. He started sprinting to that direction. Tree root caught his feet, branches scratched all over him, but he rolled on to the direction. All the while, what felt like dry tree branch kept whipping on his back.
You beat me off! I'll skin you alive!
The voice followed him. Kwangsu ran into something hard and realized it was a corral for goat. He crawled inside and hid himself in the herd of goats.
That sneaky little bastard! Were it not for my broken toe, I could have bitten off his thigh,
the voice said. The sky was already turning into transparent blue as the first sign of the dawn, But the sound of that something throwing a rope over inside a corral and wiggling about continued till the sky brightened up in golden red. By then, Kwangs could see between goats' legs that something, dried and parched like a bare tree branch, lidless eyeballs set deep in the dark eye sockets, gigantic mouth that took over the half of its face, revealing big dagger-like teeth inside. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Do you remember any of the stories told by your own grandparents? Sadly, I wasn't particularly close to mine. My grandpas on both sides were rather stern and stiff, wouldn't have made a good storytellers in any case. My grandma on father's side was illiterate, and grandma on mother's side was too energetic and practical to calmly sit down and tell a story. And yet, just some bits I rarely got to hear from them had a lot in common with stories in today's collection. I assume the world full of spirits, monsters, cryptids was pretty real for their generation. If you enjoyed my work, please leave a comment and give a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link's in the description. There's also a super thanks option to make a small donation here on YouTube. Thank you. Next Sunday is going to be already the last new episode of my 4th year. Until then, stay safe and take care.